very pleased to be here today to join you, and I want to recognize Maryland Center for International Business Education and Research, so thank you, Kaslai, for your leadership there, and for the hospitality and generosity in putting together this event, which hopefully can be a good interactive discussion about important topics. I think the focus, emerging markets at a crossroads, challenges, prospects, and opportunities is an important and timely subject. So let me thank Slaya, let me thank Michael Ball for his work, Michelle Louie, who I'm sure did all the work behind the scenes. I'm sure you'll get adequate thanks later, I hope, but I certainly appreciate your work getting me here today. So throughout the day, you're going to be participating in panels, listening to speeches and presentations on banking and finance, the role of the diaspora, the role that education can play. And I know because some of my friends and colleagues from the World Bank and elsewhere who are brilliant economists are going to come and talk to you. But I'm a simple guy. And I hope my colleagues will forgive me, but I want to talk about cell phones. Take a cell phone. Yep. Everyone has a cell phone here. When I lived in South Africa, I didn't have any cell phones. That would have been a very different experience, but we all have cell phones now. And I'm not going to tell you to turn them off, which most people would do at these conferences. You can keep them on. I don't really care. If social pressure won't get you to turn them off, I'm not going to. But I do want to take a second look at them and think about them. If you're like me, your cell phone, or if you're like me, your cell phones, 2 or 3 probably, are an integral part of your existence. They help you connect with loved ones. When you're not playing games on them, they help you be more productive or at least connected in your daily life. But cell phones, I think, also can tell us a story. And that's what I want to do with you today. And it's a story I want to tell primarily about Africa, which I see as an increasingly important emerging market with higher growth rates than anywhere in the developed world and higher investment returns than anywhere in the developing or emerging world. A place where I think the risks and inefficiencies can be smartly managed and exploited for both public and private good. And the story I want to tell is a story of how sub-Saharan Africa has and can continue to overcome some of its challenges and the types of opportunities it will present for investors. A story of how the innovative uses of existing technology can lead to growth in complementary markets and fields. A story of how networks of know-how and experience can turn a country's unique knowledge in a particular industry into the jobs of today and new industries for tomorrow. A story of how perceived weakness can be turned into economic strength. Of how to make productive use of foreign investment in order to avoid conflict and to create balanced economies, and a story of how opportunity is calling, pun intended, across sub-Saharan Africa, but somebody ultimately has to heed that call and pick up the phone. So cell phone use in Africa has grown exponentially. Sub-Saharan Africa is the fastest growing cell phone market in the world. According to Deloitte, phone penetration in sub-Saharan Africa grew from 1% in 2000 to 54% in 2012. More than 500 million people on the continent use cell phones, and by 2016, cell phone penetration is expected to be more than 75%, or more than 700 million people. Now, these figures are impressive in their own right, and they provide, I think, anecdotal evidence about growth in sub-Saharan Africa. But if you look deeper and look at how cell phones are being used not just as communication devices, but as mobile banking platforms, you can start to see how the innovative use of existing technology to solve practical problems can create complementarity and the conditions for future economic growth and investment opportunities. Because of the relatively high costs of traditional banking products, the distances required to get to brick-and-mortar banks, and the amount of paperwork involved in opening accounts, many poor people, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, even here in this country, do not have traditional bank accounts. In 2011, research by my colleagues at the World Bank showed that 2.5 billion people across the world do not have bank accounts. And there was a huge gap between developed countries, where about 89% of people have accounts, and developing countries where less than 41% do. But thanks to the innovative use of cell phones, mobile banking has exploded across sub-Saharan Africa and is changing the way people in Africa conduct financial transactions. In the same 2011 study, the World Bank found 20 countries in which more than 10% of adults said they used mobile money at some point in the year. Of those 20 countries, 15 were in Africa. Mobile banking provides benefits across the board, increases poor people's access to financial services, lowers the cost of banking, allows people who cannot get to a branch or an ATM to use financial services, removing the bias of the banking system towards the well-educated, brings more people into the formal banking sector. For example, in Kenya, where almost 70% of adults use mobile money, more than 40% also have an ordinary bank account. So it helps to deepen the traditional services as well. It also allows the diaspora community, which we'll hear more about later, to deposit remittances for their families. With a large part of the startup capital in Africa coming from the diaspora, mobile banking is helping to finance business across the continent. Similar to how the innovative use of cell phone technology was able to create complementary growth in financial services, today in Africa, I think this same hardware, the same backbone has the potential to create complementary growth in education, healthcare, employment. Think about massively open online courses, MOOCs, probably a big topic in higher education now, but they offer the potential for sub-Saharan Africans to access affordable education that they can use to improve skills and chances of getting jobs. MOOCs and other new innovations we perhaps haven't even identified yet and come up with yet can help sub-Saharan African people prepare for the jobs of today. For example, with support from the World Bank, there's a pilot program in Tanzania trying to incorporate MOOCs as part of a broader initiative to equip students with market-relevant IT skills to overcome a mismatch of skills in the local job market. McKinsey estimates that Africa will add 120 million more people to its labor force by 2020 for a total labor force of 500 million people. We're going to need to find new ways of educating more cheaply. I think MOOCs provide one way for countries to give rural primary students access to education in order to compete. Not just rural students, of course, urban students. Africa is urbanizing at a rapid clip. From 1990 to 2009, the urban population in sub-Saharan Africa increased by 114%, over 300 million people. And by 2050, sub-Saharan Africa's urban population is estimated to increase to between 1.5 billion to 2 billion. A large part of this urbanization is the result of young people leaving the countryside and moving to cities in search of jobs and better lives. So giving rural students access to better education can help prepare children for start jobs today and expand the growing middle class. And as middle classes grow, this is an emerging market story here, and as urban populations swell, these trends create new opportunities for investors. Let's look at residential real estate, for example. Ghana creates some interesting examples. Ghana is suffering from a shortage of housing and home ownership. Ghana's housing deficit stood at 1.4 million units in 2011 and is projected to hit 5.7 million deficit by 2020, according to the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. It's estimated that only 26% of households today in the urban areas own the houses they live in. Now, apparently 60% of Ghanaians who want to build or buy a home require financial assistance. How does this 60% of Ghanaians create a possibility for a mortgage credit market in Ghana? Now, still many financial institutions are unwilling to venture into the mortgage market due to liquidity and other concerns, but a few innovative financial institutions are in the process now of aggregating capital for the purpose of securitization and increased lending for a homeowner and a housing market in Ghana. And I think Ghana's burgeoning mortgage market shows how residential real estate in Africa could emerge as an asset class comparable to those in the developed world, hopefully not too comparable in all dimensions, since we've had some challenges of their own. So what makes the cell phone so powerful, both in reality and I think also as a metaphor, is that it is a device for solving one problem, communicating, that has exploded into one of the most effective anti-poverty tools the world has ever seen. Once upon a time, a bank was a stone building with paper and coin money inside. Now, for many people, a bank is right here. Once upon a time, a school was a brick building with books and a live teacher inside. Now, for many people, school can be in here, probably a little smarter phone than the other one. Once upon a time, seeing a doctor meant scheduling a visit. Hearing music meant going to a concert. Irrigating your crops meant something physical. Something as small and perhaps simple as a cell phone, though I don't know how simple in reality this is anymore, in the hands of innovative entrepreneurs can create a whole host of opportunities. But of course, for a cell phone to have value, you need someone else to have one too. You need a network which drives the value for you and others simultaneously. And like cell phones, countries need functioning networks. And how these networks function can determine a country's growth prospects. I've recently become very interested in some of the work by Ricardo Hausmann at Harvard and Cesar Hidalgo at MIT on their theory for predicting countries' future economic growth by analyzing their ability to develop networks around their know-how and how people store and combine their knowledge in networks of sharing and building on this knowledge. They have a wonderful Scrabble theory of economic development, which is a really interesting way of thinking about how you need to accumulate letters and know-how and let you build more words. But actually, you don't want the same letters everyone else has. You want new letters that are more valuable. And there are two types of knowledge I talk about, explicit and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is what's easily transferable. But tacit knowledge is more deeply ingrained in the historical experiences of a population and is not so easily or cheaply replicated. So let's talk about a country not in Africa, but Finland. With almost 3/4 of the land area in Finland covered by forests, Finns acquired over time a long history and deep knowledge of forest industries. And at the time of Finland's independence in 1917, their GDP per capita was about half that of the United Kingdom. Today it's about the same, about identical to the UK. And Finland's industrialization and economic development began in the 1920s and 1930s with its export of forest products. Naturally, Finland started chopping down its trees to export them, timber, pulp, and paper sectors. And the traditional economic development thinking would say, great, you've got a lot of trees, a lot of forests, you're good at cutting and selling wood, why don't you move into furniture making, a higher value-added activity? But the Finns did move up the value chain, but instead of focusing on furniture, they actually expanded their expertise in cutting things. And they started exporting tools for cutting down trees. And from an expertise in tools that cut things, Finland then moved further up the value chain and started making automated cutting tools, increasing the know-how in manufacturing around automated tools. And Finland didn't just keep getting better with trees and in forest industries. Instead, its people acquired new skills and branched out into related but separate fields, including chemicals and supply chain management. And this was made possible by networks that manage the Finns' know-how. Large companies grew around Finland's clustered yet spread out population, creating valuable networks for the organization of knowledge and know-how. And these companies, along with a supportive government, trained workers in engineering and sciences. And over time, these companies began to compete with one another, driving more innovation around their automated cutting machines. And their long distance from export markets put pressure on these companies to create technologies that cut costs. And since forests are largely owned by farmers that like to keep the price of their wood high, companies had to increase their productivity and compete on productivity. And in the 1980s, Finland was able to take all of this acquired know-how and make the leap, not into more advanced furniture making, but from an expertise in complex automated machines into telecommunications and information services, with companies like Nokia, which had started out in paper and pulp, leading the way into cell phones. And the lessons from Finland can be applied to sub-Saharan Africa, where countries have people with great know-how, but weak or non-existent networks to organize this knowledge. Let's take Senegal. Senegal is strategically located on the west coast of Africa, where it can relatively easily export to its West African neighbors, Europe, Latin America, the United States. And Senegalese have a long history of fishing, much like Finns and forests. Archaeological discoveries have found evidence of axes and planes indicating shipbuilding by fishermen dating back to the Neolithic era. Today, Senegal's largest export sector is commercial fishing. Now, most of this fishing is done using traditional methods, which I think means there is potential for Senegal to move up the value chain, similar to the ways Finland did, acquiring more and related know-how and branching out into other sectors. The seeds of potential networks already exist. Many of Senegal's fishermen organize themselves into cooperatives, which create employment opportunities for Senegal's rural population and for women who are not traditional fishermen. So can these rural cooperatives begin to organize Senegalese fishing know-how and turn it into business opportunities in processing and distribution and manufacturing of small boats and fishing equipment and floating devices, and who knows where it may go. From there, Senegal could start producing commercial boats and so on. Over time, these cooperatives could become companies that compete with one another for export share, drive innovation and productivity, in much the same way that town-based forestry companies were the basis for Finland's strong multinational companies. So networks of know-how can create the jobs of today, but also the industries for tomorrow in West Africa. But it's not always clear how it happens or even if that it will happen. Think again of cell phones. With its cell phone revolution, Africa leapfrogged traditional landlines entirely and is reinventing financial services in a very different model. Imagine sub-Saharan Africa's potential if it can leapfrog other barriers, traditionally defined barriers to growth, and turn weaknesses into economic strengths. Let's look at Israel, a country that also had to leapfrog some barriers. Because of its geographic location, Israel suffers from a lack of fresh water. Yet Israel was able to overcome this weakness and become a world leader in water technology. It's a success story of partnership between a decisive public sector and an innovative private sector. Recognizing the danger posed by a lack of fresh water, the Israeli government passed in 1959 a comprehensive water law that made all sources of fresh water public property regardless of individual property rights. The law established a strong water commission responsible for ensuring conservation, the prevention of water pollution, and a fair allocation of water to all Israelis, leading to, in 1964, a landmark national water carrier system. The government also created a state-owned company, a Mekarot Water Company, responsible for, among other things, developing new sources of water. Mekarot invests heavily in its own R&D and works actively with Israeli universities, private companies, technology incubators, and private investors. Because of this partnership, about 2/3 of water in Israel is provided by the public sector, and 1/3 is provided by the private sector. Now, this is a good example, in my view, about why too much orthodoxy about public versus private ownership of assets on either side is misplaced. But that's for a different lecture. Israel's version of public-private partnership helped lead to innovations in products that Israeli companies like Netafim, which helped pioneer drip irrigation technologies, are selling all over the world. I remember seeing these microjet water technology when I was in South Africa in the white farms. And it was always Israeli water technology. And today, Israel is a world leader in these low-pressure irrigation systems, seawater desalinization, wastewater treatment. The weakness of having poor water resources helped drive the innovation that led to a tremendous strength in water technology. Now let's consider the so-called curse of being a landlocked country. Paul Collier, in his wonderful book, The Bottom Billion, which I commend to you if you haven't read it, tells us that one of the worst fates for any country is to be landlocked and surrounded by other countries that also have development challenges. 38% of what he calls the bottom billion, the poorest billion people on Earth, and 30% of Africa's population lives in landlocked countries. So let's look at Zambia, where I traveled in February. Zambia is bordered by 8 countries: Botswana, Namibia, Angola, DRC, Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. And some of these neighbors have significant governance and development challenges. According to Collier, this puts Zambia in one of the weakest positions on Earth. True, Zambia does have many development challenges. For example, despite strong growth and the ability to float a very oversubscribed bond privately last year, 60% of Zambia's population lives below the poverty line, and about 74% of its rural population lives in poverty. But despite its challenges, Zambia also has enormous potential. What some consider its big weakness, being landlocked, could in fact be a great strength. Being landlocked means Zambia shares an immediate border with 8 countries that are easily or could be easily accessible markets for its exports. 58% of Zambia's land is suitable for agricultural production, yet agriculture currently makes up only about 20% of Zambia's GDP. With investments in crop-boosting technologies and increased partnerships with the private sector, that share, I think, has substantial room to grow. Zambia could become a major food exporter and breadbasket for southern and eastern Africa, leveraging its very landlocked position. Zambia also has tremendous water resources, unlike Israel, with the mighty Zambezi River and more than 10 other major rivers flowing through its borders. In fact, Zambia has 40% of the water resources in southern Africa. Zambia could become a major producer and exporter of hydro-powered electricity. Almost 80% of sub-Saharan Africa lacks access to electricity. And because of its position in southern Africa and also its proximity to North, Central, and East Africa, Zambia could be a major exporter to other parts of the continent. question for policymakers and for investors alike is how to turn Zambia's weakness as a landlocked country into the competitive advantage of having 8 connectable markets for food, water, and power. One obvious answer will involve making good use of foreign investment to responsibly profit from your resources. So let's talk about foreign investment and responsibility. Do you have that cell phone? That cell phone in your pocket contains within it several minerals that are mined in conflict-affected areas of Central Africa. Coltan, used in your cell phone's power storing capacitors, so I'm told. Tin goes into your cell phone's circuit boards. Tungsten allows your cell phone to vibrate. And gold is used in the manufacturing of the semiconductors. Now, these minerals are sometimes referred to as conflict minerals, inspired by the concept of conflict diamonds, most commonly associated with conflicts in West Africa. Both conflict minerals and conflict diamonds represent a common challenge facing many sub-Saharan African countries. How can Africa leverage its natural resources to finance productive and not destructive activities, be they armed conflict or over-reliance on commodity exports? Botswana is one of the world's largest producers of diamonds, yet it managed to avoid the armed conflicts that gripped much of West Africa. Along the way, Botswana achieved the highest economic growth rate in the world between 1966 and 1999. Botswana, the highest growth rate in the world. Today, Botswana is an upper-middle income country. Its GDP per capita of close to $17,000 is more than 10 times the sub-Saharan African average. Botswana no doubt benefited from its strong democracy and prudent management of diamond-related revenue. But even though it avoided conflict, it has not been able to move beyond its reliance on commodity exports the way a country like Norway has. Norway is the world's 3rd largest gas and 7th largest oil producer, or exporter. But Norway also developed and maintains a diversified and balanced economy. A key to this has been Norway managing inward foreign direct investment. Foreign companies were a key part of Norway's early oil and gas development. Foreign investors were welcomed. But according to an analysis of foreign direct investment flows by the University of Columbia's Vail Center on Sustainable International Investment, it welcomed them only to the extent that their activities were perceived as having provided net social and economic benefits. According to the Vail Center, Norway's inward FDI policy focused on retaining as much as possible of the natural resource rent and developing a domestic manufacturing base with the help of foreign capital and technology. So I think there are 2 sub-Saharan Africa, at least 2 countries, that stand out as test cases for how and when to channel foreign investment into productive activities. Angola is Africa's 2nd largest oil exporter and its 3rd largest economy. It has endured decades of armed conflict, but a recent period of welcome and productive and profitable peace. And like most other resource-rich African countries, its economy is heavily reliant on commodity oil exports, with oil revenue accounting for almost 3/4 of government revenue. Nonetheless, Angola is attempting to diversify its economy. It's planning to launch what would be Africa's 6th largest stock exchange by 2015, with hopes for a minimum capitalization of about $11 billion, or close to 10% of its GDP. In theory, a stock exchange could help Angola allocate capital to new, untapped sectors of a more diversified economy. And its planned stock exchange is expected to include shares of domestic oil, coffee, cement companies to start with. It's also planning to develop a secondary bond market for corporate debt. A secondary market would help lead the establishment of a yield curve for Africa, an important barometer for assessing risk in an economy. Finally, Angola's central bank is working with private sector experts to establish a uniform interest rate for government bonds and short-term treasury bills with similar maturities. This uniform interest rate would allow foreign investors to realize profits and take them out of Angola without a shock to the exchange rate. These are promising steps to productively help channel foreign investment into building a diversified and balanced economy, not reliant on oil. We'll have to wait and see. Mozambique, on the other hand, where I was in February on the same trip I took to Zambia, only recently discovered huge amounts of coal and natural gas. Mozambique has over 32 billion tons of confirmed coal deposits and over 300 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas, making it comparable to Norway. Now, when I was in Mozambique, some of the youth we saw there have read in the papers that Mozambique is now rich. And they want to know when they're getting their check, or at least their piece of the pie, or even just a job. Now, current World Bank estimates predict inward FDI flows of up to $90 billion in the next 10 years for Mozambique. Mozambique is at a crossroads. It can go down the path of so many other resource-rich countries, a path that can lead to vast income inequality and social instability, or even a devastating return to armed conflict and over-reliance on commodity exports, or all of these problems. Or will Mozambique be blessed to have a different future? Mozambique can choose to signal perhaps to foreign investors that it is only willing to allow investments that are mutually beneficial to both sides. Instead of receiving large flows of capital only in its extractive industries, can Mozambique create the conditions for investments in other sectors of its economy? Because of its favorable climate and huge tracts of arable land, Mozambique has the potential in agriculture and agribusiness. Because of its pristine coastline, can it become a more attractive destination for tourism investments? Mozambique can't demand that foreign investors take the responsibility for its own development. The country needs to signal to others that it takes its balanced development seriously by strengthening the rule of law, building stronger institutions, prudently managing its revenue, investing in its own infrastructure and human capital, and more. If it can do this, I think Mozambique can be an example for the rest of Africa and a very attractive place to invest. So I've used the cell phone to tell a story about 4 different types of opportunity. How do you, like Finland, take know-how in one sector, automated wood-cutting machines or fishing, and create new technologies based on networks that utilize and exploit this know-how and end up with Nokia? How do you take the weakness of having no landline phones or being landlocked and turn it into a strength that drives wireless or even agricultural innovation? How do you create complementary uses for existing technologies so that a communication device also becomes your financial institution or new, cheaper, better schoolhouse? And finally, how do we make sure the natural mineral resources that make a cell phone even function are also making the people in countries that possess those natural resources wealthy in the process? Well, for me, the answer has a lot to do with leadership, public and private leadership that can hear the call of opportunity and be willing, ready, and able to metaphorically pick up the phone. And that's where you come in, and events like this come in. The students and entrepreneurs and policymakers in this room who will play a critical role defining what the emerging markets of the future look like, where they are, whether their growth brings sustainable benefits and opportunities for their citizens. So let me urge you to answer that call and pick up that phone and remember what it can represent in terms of innovation around weaknesses, exploiting know-how and complementarity, avoiding the resource curse, and overcoming the paradox of natural wealth. The challenges, prospects, and opportunities of emerging markets, the theme of this conference, and I suggest you broaden that concept to include the frontier markets that have inefficiencies you can exploit for public and private good. These prospects are very much in your hands. So don't turn off that cell phone, keep it on, use it, think about what it represents as a machine, a milestone, a mode of interaction and transaction, and also a metaphor. Connect with others, make a difference. Yes, we can.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is really a great opening for this forum. The other thing that Anne did for me was that in the next panel, when moderating, I had actually planned to say a couple of words about Africa. I think he has done that all, so that way I can actually save time. The one thing that I would like to mention is that following up on the subject of technology and global integration is exciting times in Africa. I wanted to mention later on a very important case, which I think Anne is very familiar with, the story of Equity Bank in Kenya. It's a very interesting case, and we'll talk about that later. But I think that he'll open up for maybe a couple of questions because we are running behind. Anyone? Yep. Ritu?
Thank you, Mr. Salman. That was very exciting. I found your characterization of the market potential in sub-Saharan Africa very compelling. Yesterday, I heard an interview with Mo Ibrahim, who gives out the Ibrahim Prize, and he expressed some frustration at what he characterized as the administration and U.S. businesses' disregard for Africa. And he also expressed frustration that most of the relationships that were being built were with Asia and Europe. So I wondered if you cared to comment on that. If indeed there is such a huge market potential and opportunity, why are US businesses not moving more speedily?
So it's a good question, and I hope people heard that when they were listening to that radio program. I know that Mo is a great spokesperson for the potential of the continent, and I certainly, as you can tell, think he makes a compelling case, and I share that I think smart confidence in the continent's potential. And when I travel around and try to give talks like this, I try very much to be a representative of this administration saying, yes, we can and should be doing more on the continent. And I talk to businesses, and I think there's sometimes an information gap. Not for everybody. There are a number of firms that are moving very aggressively into the continent, and that will continue, and they'll make lots of money. And they don't always want me to go out talking about how great the opportunity is, because they'd rather not have so much competition. But I told them, I was at on a panel for another university recently with Jay Ireland from GE, and I said, my goal for you, Jay, is to get you so much competition, this is a less good opportunity for you. Because we can actually, I think the opportunity is big enough. For those who don't know, GE kind of has set up an Africa business based in Nairobi to really serve the continent, and they're going to make a lot of money. Others can too, and should too. Do I wish we had more opportunity in this administration to spend more time focused on Africa? Absolutely. I think you'll see more of it, and I hope that you'll be a part of it as well. And I think there is a big opportunity here that is good for the U.S. strategically, in terms of relationships around the world, good for the U.S. economically, in terms of business growth and opportunities and export markets and more jobs here in the U.S., and also the right thing morally.
Thank you. One more question, and then we'll proceed to the next.
First, I want to thank you very much for your excellent, wonderful speech, and I really enjoyed the examples that you gave. Since I'm from China, I'm more concerned with that part of the world. My question is about the issues and maybe the challenges China is facing right now. And as we all know, there's a huge flow going on all over the country, and there are some potential risks towards all the enterprises and all the corporations in China. And what's your idea about how do companies, and especially American companies, deal with this kind of risks, especially in supply chain, in economy, stuff like that? And also, is there any other opportunities that we can seize in China right now that can help to develop the whole, to develop the corporate financing stuff like that? Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that it's actually a good story, because there was a time not too many decades ago when China seemed like too complicated a place to do business. And now I don't know many U.S. firms that are not in some way getting some of their supply chain from China. In fact, go back to that cell phone. I ordered my wife an iPad, and it was shipped straight from the factory, and never even and never even touched down here before coming straight to my house. So certainly are there challenges in governance? Are there challenges in labor? Are there challenges with natural resources? Are there challenges with climate protection? Absolutely. And it's up to the Chinese people to work on those. I think the World Bank worked very closely with China on a China 2030 report to help envision a sustainable future for the country where prosperity can be shared and the global economy benefits from a strong China. I think that China is certainly looking very much at Africa right now, and is very much engaged on the continent. In fact, there are many countries on the continent where you see growing Chinese populations attending the public local public African schools. They're there for the long term. And for me, it's this is a great story of this is a great story of how if you're hungry and looking for opportunities around the world, you certainly can find them. But yes, there are risks. And the Chinese, I think, have tried very hard, and they're learning in the process. I think they've made some mistakes in parts of Africa. And what I usually say is, well, the job of the World Bank and the U.S. is how do we build the capacity of African governments and African leaders so they can strike good contracts for themselves and make sure that the deals they're making with the Chinese, with the Americans, with whomever, are ones that are transparent, are fair, and are going to deliver the long-term benefits for the people, so that we do see sustained growth and strong middle classes and a good rule of law, and not some of the carnage and problems we've seen in the past. But I'm optimistic. There are speed bumps and potholes for all of us in this global economy. But I think that events like this and the chance to kind of deepen the strength of multilateral institutions like the World Bank and the IMF that you mentioned, to kind of have a place we can actually try to resolve this through PowerPoints and documents, as opposed to with bombs and bullets and currency wars. That's all to the good. So,
thank you very much.